Testing. 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 Testing.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Victory Life Podcast. 5 minutes, 5 minutes. everybody. 3 minutes. 3 minutes. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Victory Life Podcast. 1 minute, everybody. 1 minute. Welcome. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, YouTube. Welcome, YouTube. Welcome, Facebook. Welcome, Instagram. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Victory Life Podcast. 30 seconds. Instagram coming in strong tonight. Thank you. 15 seconds. Welcome. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Victory Life Podcast. I'm your host, Hannah Marie. Thank you guys so much for joining. Welcome, YouTube. Welcome, Facebook. And welcome, Instagram. Thank you guys for joining. In case you guys didn't know, this is our podcast, the Victory Life Podcast. It's all about tackling the day-to-day issues, but tackling those issues biblically. So for today's episode, we are going to be talking about being hooked on tacos. That's right. We're going to talk about being hooked on tacos, most importantly, because we're talking about the battle of gluttony. And in case you guys didn't know, this is the perfect stream for kids generally around 13 years old on up. You know, sometimes we get into the weeds with some very, very adult content. I think this particular stream is going to be good for everyone, including the really small children. So we welcome even your little bitty ones. We welcome them on into the stream. So again, welcome YouTube, welcome Facebook, welcome Instagram, welcome everybody. And guys, in case you haven't been on this stream before, we have tackled many important topics. We've tackled things just such as dreams, rejection. We've talked about lukewarm Christians. We've talked about prenups and cohabitation. We've talked about the race against time. We've talked about being Miss Independent. We've even talked about chasing dreams, and we've talked about restoring the broken home. But for today's episode, again, today we are on episode 33. We are on season 3, and today we're going to be talking about being hooked on tacos. That's right. We're going to be talking about the battle of gluttony. And for you guys who didn't know, you know, the battle of gluttony is a really serious battle. And I think it's very often that we overlook and minimize this specific battle. But we're going to talk about it today because it's a very important battle. And we'll talk about it why in just a minute. So I know we're going to be saying hooked on tacos every now and then, but this is not just about being hooked on tacos. By the way, I happen to love me some Mexican food, so that's why I named it Hooked on Tacos. But I will say that the battle of gluttony is very diverse. Some of us have a taste for sweet tooth, you know, others have a taste for tacos, you know, some of us, you know, have a taste for just kind of overeating and just being excessive, even if it's something that's not specifically bad for us. So we're going to talk about the battle of gluttony today because, you know, gluttony is the tendency to overindulge in food. It's the tendency of excessively eating. And so it's an important topic for us to discuss. So I want us to think about this as a big deal, actually. And I know it's easy for us to look at the battle of gluttony and think it's not a big deal at all. But it is very much a big deal. The Bible actually talks about us having a natural body and a physical body and a spiritual body. That's what the Bible actually talks about. And we have to do our best to take care of both of those bodies. And that means what we put inside of our body, inside of our temple, what we put inside of our body actually matters. It matters quite a bit. And when we don't have that specific control over our body, I can look at it and almost categorize it, almost and kind of label it in the bucket of disorders of the flesh. You know, when we don't have control over our eating, it's not much different from not having control over anger or not having control over sexual immorality. It's much the same as putting it in those other buckets. It's an issue not just for eating, it's also an issue for self-control. And oftentimes when we're talking about someone who's struggling with self-control, we'll see the lack of self-control come out in many aspects of their lives. So it's not just that they're maybe having a struggle with food. It could be that we see a parallel of a self-control struggle in other areas. So that's one of the reasons why I want to talk about it today. I want to peel back the battle of gluttony a bit because it's not necessarily always just about food. Sometimes there's something else at the root. Here's one of those other things I want to cover as we talk about this. I want to actually have you guys think back to if you have a struggle, if gluttony is your battle, if it happens to be your battle. I don't want this conversation to bring upon any shame with anyone, because I'm going to tell you right now, whether someone is battling and living in a state of obesity or whether they are not living in obesity, gluttony can actually still be a battle, whether you actually visibly look overweight or not. Again, it's about excessive eating, overindulging. It's about having the fruit of a lack of self-control. And so it may not always manifest itself as obesity. Likewise, vice versa. So I wanted to make sure I put that out there, that there are some people who are battling gluttony and it's not visibly showing itself in a space of obesity, but that does not mean the battle is not real for them. And it also does not mean that that battle is not a sin. Just because you're lean and your body mass index is well within the norm, if you're struggling with gluttony, it doesn't make it less of a sin because we can't see it. And that's one of the things I wanted to go ahead and just put out there and go ahead and expose, that the battle of gluttony is one that is also one that many people are actually battling in secrecy. It's oftentimes a secret battle. And you might think, well, how could gluttony be a secret battle? I will tell you, because more times than not, we see people that have pretty normal eating patterns when we see them in public or amongst family and friends. But there are these other times that people have this quiet behavior where they go home and the behavior looks very different at home than it does out in public. So there may be some secret eating at home, some secret eating when people aren't around, and all of that secrecy baked in. It's something that I feel like when we think about the battle of gluttony, it shows you the sinfulness because we're feeling uncomfortable almost doing it in public. And so I want to peel back those layers because, again, if we're going to say that gluttony is a sin, if we're going to put it in the same category as many other sins, we have to talk about why it may seem bad. We have to talk about that. And so, oftentimes when we're talking about people who are participating in watching a program that's an inappropriate program, maybe there's, sexual content that's visible, that's inappropriate, and they're watching that. Oftentimes, very similar, if we want to make a parallel to gluttony, we often observe people doing that behavior in private, much like the eating can happen in private. And so I want to peel that back because the devil loves to work in secrecy. So I want to go ahead and acknowledge that. I want to go ahead and acknowledge what it is. And because if we don't acknowledge it, then we can't really do anything about it. And so that's why I wanted to talk a little bit about that. And so, again, we've talked about the issue of gluttony being actually a sin. And so we have to cover that, the fact that our body is actually a temple of the Most High God. And so what we do to our body actually matters. It matters, how we take care of our body. It matters what we do actually to our body. And so there are many different health impacts that are the direct result of the sin of gluttony. We can talk about, high cholesterol, high blood pressure, diabetes, many health impacts to the battle of gluttony. And for some people, their health issue has nothing to do with gluttony. I will go ahead and put that out. It's not necessarily a one-to-one, but certainly the battle of gluttony doesn't help the physical health issues that take shape. So I want to go ahead and put that out there. We're not going to have a stream that's all about the medical piece. And I'll be honest with you guys, I wrote this stream twice. I wrote it twice because first time around, it was all about the medical because you guys know I'm a registered nurse. So I had a lot of medical stuff in here. I've carved out my thought process on the medical piece because really that's kind of another stream. There's plenty of meat actually in the Bible that talks about this particular battle. And we may not have looked at some of the scriptures that way, but I got such an amazing download from the Lord specifically around scriptures that I feel are very impactful to this particular battle that I wanted to bring that up, and I wanted the focus to really be on the scriptures versus the medical side. But, we can always talk about the medical side when I do, one of our light live streams where, they're informal, we can always do that. So again, we're talking about gluttony because it is a common battle. Many of us are dying actually of the obesity, associated with gluttony. But there's very much a spiritual side to this. And if we take this all the way back, if we take it back to, what many of us have experienced in our lives, when it comes to a battle that is a sinful battle where there's quote unquote an open door in your life, a lot of times, if you take this particular sin and we make it a parallel to other different kinds of sin, we could make it a parallel to the sin of anger. We could make it a parallel to the sin of sexual immorality. When we take gluttony and we actually let it be what it is, an equal sin, that it's not less of a sin or more of a sin, that it's an equal sin. When we take gluttony and we peel it back and we make it an equal sin because that is what it is not acceptable in the eyes of God, like many other sins. Again, we minimize it because it seems like it's a simple one, but it's an equal sin in the eyes of God. Again, judgment can be different based on sins, but the sin is still a separation from God. It's equal in the eyes of God as something that he does not like. Again, all of our sins are actually forgivable, and we have to repent of those sins, turn away from them, etc. So they're all forgivable, but they are in the same bucket. Sins are sins. We have to call it what it is. And that's how we're going to start getting control over a battle like this. We first have to call it out what it is and acknowledge it so that as we begin to tackle it, we have the right tools and resources to actually successfully tackle it. But when I think about all of our different various struggles of sin, be it sexual immorality, be it anger, be it drunkenness, be it addiction, be it gluttony, if I peel those things back, what often I will see on the spiritual side is there's usually a root. There's usually actually a root to where that activity actually began. And oftentimes the activity begins to manifest itself after a traumatic event, after some childhood trauma, a traumatic event, seeing something in our eye gate or in our ear gate that has pushed us kind of over the edge. Someone, and traumatic events can even be bullying at school, someone making fun, things like that, someone messing and destroying our self-esteem. It could be the domestic violence that a man or woman is going through at home, someone picking on them, poking or picking on them or making fun of their physical body. These things are very damaging to the person that's in receipt of these things, and they can bring upon something that is an open door, which becomes the gluttony. It can bring upon them pain through trauma, and as a result of the trauma, some people are seeking comfort in the food. And so again, when we talk about, similar to maybe alcohol, when we talk about alcohol, we can see alcohol in the Bible, and alcohol in the Bible is not specifically a sin. Alcohol is not specifically a sin. It's not called out as a sin. We even see Jesus turning water to wine in the Bible. But I will say that drunkenness is described as something that should be avoided in the Bible. Similarly, food is seen in the Bible in many instances as something that is a very good thing. We often see different individuals taking food items and putting them on an altar for God, to honor God, respect God, as a sacrifice to God. We're seeing food used in many positive ways, but when food becomes an addiction or an overindulgence or excessively, it's an excessive form of intake, that's when it becomes a sin. So something that's good can become bad based on your heart posture, based on the indulgence, based on the secrecy, the shame, the hiding it, all of those things where the devil loves to work in secrecy and loves to work through the shame, that's where it becomes a sin. And so it's important that I will say this as we're getting into this conversation. Again, this is not about bringing shame upon someone. If there happens to be an issue with obesity, again, obesity does not have to always mean that someone has an excessive eating issue. It could just be eating wrong things. It could be many different things that go into the space of obesity. It could be hormonal things. Many different things can go into the space of obesity. Gluttony does not always equal obesity. Again, there are many very lean people who have a body mass index that's quite within normal range who are still suffering from the sin of gluttony and are battling that out each and every day. So I want to make sure that we understand that a person who is lean can also have a struggle with gluttony. And so let's talk about a couple of things. I want to talk a little bit about the physical health side. I'm not going to go all into the weeds of it. I'll catch you guys on an informal live to do little conversations like this. But just, in general, A couple of tips that I'll leave you guys with, because this is a physical health related issue as well. We talk about the body having a physical body, us having a spiritual body, but with regards to your physical body, when we're talking about the intake and what we're putting inside of our body, I just want to remind you guys that we do have an ability to put forth some self-control in the aspect of, what we go to the store and pick up, what we actually bring home, how much of it we bring home, and that the battle actually, for many people, actually starts there. It starts with preparation. For a person who is in a very disciplined place, they're doing, they may be preparing their meals and doing their meal planning for the week and just putting food together, storing it up, and making the things that are easily accessible, healthy things. So I'll leave you guys with that. It's a very good idea to make what's accessible to you, what's quick, easily, and accessible to you, something healthy. Meal prep things are very useful. That's another healthy and easy way to tackle some of this gluttony. I'll also say that, if you're going to have a treat that you desire from the store, always nice to have a small version of that treat, even if you're paying a little more for it. And I tell you, if you pay a little bit more for it, but you're getting a smaller version of it, if all you have at home accessible to you is the small version, then that's all you can eat without working really hard, getting in the car, driving to the store, and picking up that item again. So it's just going to give you a little bit of space and separation between having the tasty treat and then overindulging in it. If it's only a single item, a small little snack size, then even though you may have paid, $1 to $3 for a snack size item, that's kind of, one portion, one serving size, at least when you had the craving and you had the temptation and you grabbed it, you only grabbed one versus having the family size bag. And then when you're having the trouble with the overindulgence, you're grabbing that family size bag and going in and then clearing out potentially most of the bag over a couple of days. So it's a very different battle if you limit what's even accessible to you in your hand. And we can say that, and we can say that that's, not necessarily useful. But guys, we actually do that same thing every day with other battles. When we talk about the battle against sexual immorality, when we talk about being a married individual, not wanting to fall into sin, oftentimes we just avoid a certain, one-on-one gathering with a certain individual where we feel temptation. We avoid it. We just don't go. And so it's very important to know that some of the strategies that we're using, self-control in this gluttony area, you certainly can use. These are portable strategies. You can certainly use the same strategy and apply it to another work of the flesh, another area where you're struggling with self-control, and it can be equally useful. So I'll just say that. So again, without getting too far into the medical side, I'll kind of leave that there. But I do want to talk a little bit about the secrecy. And I want to, again, make it a parallel to some of the things that we see when we see infidelity or sexual immorality. We often see people working in a place of secrecy, doing something that they shouldn't want to do, sending a text message to someone that they shouldn't be talking to, someone who is, when they're married, sending it to someone and their heart posture is an attraction heart posture. It could be having a one-on-one and there's some temptation there and you're hiding it from your marital partner, those kinds of things. So when we're talking about the secrecy, again, we see the devil working through secrecy and bringing people to a place of sin in marriages when it comes to infidelity and sexual immorality. But that secrecy is also working in the space of gluttony. And that's why I want to peel it back, guys. I want to, peel it back so we can see that it's an equal sin, that it's the same stuff working. It's the works of the flesh, per Galatians, working through people. And so when we talk about the aspect of secrecy, it's the aspect of perhaps, being in front of people, eating the right size portion, but there's shame there that there's a desire to eat more than the right size. And so once everyone is out of their way, going back to their room, going back to their home space where they maybe live alone, going back to a room, and then secretly eating, that secrecy again, you see, again, that is that showing the heart posture. We're having to do it in secret. We're having to hide it. There's some shame going along with it because intuitively we know that the gluttony is not good. So that's why we're not doing it in public. And so it's something that I want to call your attention to as we cover this topic. And so let's talk a little bit more about, I want to give you guys a little bit of story time because I think it's important to, call this out a little bit. I want to shape your thoughts around gluttony a little bit because I think it's an important concept to think through from an example perspective. So there's an example, actually, this is a real life example of mine of a woman that at one point I worked with many, many years ago. There's a woman that I worked with, and gluttony was her battle. I will just say it. I'll call it out for what it is. Gluttony was her battle. And this is a time where I was traveling for work a lot. So I would travel all over the country, different states all the time. At times she would be also on the assignment, and at times she wasn't on the assignment. But the times that we were on assignment together, at times we would go have dinner at the same time at the same location. That's not it's not, unusual for people who have traveling jobs that if they have a coworker that they're working with and, doing a project with, they may actually go have meals together just because you're already on assignment. It's a normal thing. So we would often, if we were traveling together, I've seen two different aspects of this. So I'm going to call your attention to two different aspects. There's one woman who I felt struggled a whole lot with gluttony. And when we would go to dinner, her food that she ordered, comparing to the food that I order, I'm just trying to call it out here, and I'm not in touch with her. I'll never see her again kind of thing. Her food was a normal size amount of food. But then when we got ready to leave, she would order again things to take with her when everyone was already full at the table. But she would take a whole something with her back to the hotel. So this is what I'm talking about, the secrecy of it, the secrecy of when you're not wanting to do it in front of people, but you're still planning to do it. And the planning to do it is she got an extra box so that she could take it home. And then oftentimes she would end up ill the next day, either ill at work or during the assignment, not show up. These are the things that actually happen in real life on travel assignments. And even I can remember when I first started traveling, and I want to put myself in here under the gun. When I first started traveling, I realized that I gained some weight, and I was thinking, well, how did this happen? I'm relatively lean. When I first started traveling, I had to get used to the fact that I wasn't eating at home all the time, that everything was eating out. And the food is very different when you go eat out. You have less control over the oils, the butters, et cetera, et cetera. So I realized that I'm going to have to really be a lot more cautious about how I eat when I eat out, because I'm noticing not only am I always having the dessert, but I'm noticing that whatever I'm ordering, it's always tasty. I always love it. And then a few months later, I have a battle of body weight. So I got control over that, and we put that to bed. But what I will say is, for people who are traveling, I know they feel me out here in the chat. People who are traveling know that it's very common when you first start traveling that you're not putting all that together, and then when you gain some weight, then you're dealing with that. Similarly, because I traveled a whole lot, there was another lady who was extremely, had a really good self-control, and she was very disciplined about all the things. I observed that she was, well-rounded. She was well-spoken. I had this view of her that she was very knowledgeable. She, knew many different things, but I want to acknowledge that she had self-control in an aspect of eating, because I observed that even though she traveled, she was planning her meals. So it was the first time that I saw someone who was traveling just show up at work with just like a boiled egg or something like that. So she was very practical about her breakfast things as she traveled. I observed that. And these are things that I started to pick up on. The longer I traveled, I picked up on that. I'm like, okay, that's how she's staying, and under self-control and lean. She's getting certain foods that are, lower calorie, lower fat, less grease, less butter, and it's going to be protein. So it's going to help keep her full. And she's bringing those things with her as snacks instead of getting the unhealthy items that we typically get. So I learned some things from her. I learned some things about the fact that she was traveling, and she figured out how to plan things, how to plan her meals so that she didn't struggle with obesity. She didn't end up struggling with that. And then I observed, when I actually started traveling, I wasn't doing that. And that's how I ended up gaining weight. And then I observed someone else battling gluttony, hiding the food items and bringing them back to the hotel. So that's just a story time to show you that the battle can be won. There is a lot of planning and preparation that goes into it, but I want to acknowledge that, there is actually a starting point to this battle. It oftentimes starts at a root with something like, a divorce. It can start with childhood trauma. It can start with domestic violence. It can start with being shamed, bullied, made fun of, poked, prodded. It can start with a marital partner just poking fun. It can start with little things that eat away at us. But if we allow it to make us go to a place of hiding food, eating in secrecy, things like that, when we start allowing that to happen, it opens the door for an aspect of gluttony to take over. And I want to acknowledge that as it's a sin, there's also a very spiritual side. There's a spiritual side to this that we want to make sure that we're discussing. And so again, we have to bucket this. If we're thinking about it and we understand that when we have a certain aspect of lack of control, we're going to see this coming out at times as a work of the flesh. It can come out going from having one drink to alcoholism or drunkenness. It can come out from, appropriate relations with our marital partner, or it can come out as inappropriate relationships outside of our marital partner. It can come into a place where, the lack of self-control can show itself, where when we feel upset, we don't get control over our emotion, and then it spills out into, our tone getting out of control or yelling, things like that. And so it's important for us to be able to see the parallel, because it shows you that the sin is actually equal. It shows that because you can start seeing the parallel, but also, you can see that there could be a spiritual side to it, because oftentimes we're spiritually triggered and then we begin these activities. So now we've talked about the physical health side of it. Let's kind of go into some of the spiritual side, because I'm going to acknowledge that for some of us, this battle is showing up based on our emotions. And I, for one, will put myself out there just to start with. If I am in a more happy place, I look at food as more celebratory. I look at it as something that I could use when I'm socializing. And so I have a tendency when I'm celebrating and I'm in a good mood, I could have already eaten at home and gotten my meal out of the way. Then I get a phone call, chatting with someone, let's go celebrate. And then the celebration involves food again, but I'm not actually hungry. So then I begin eating, but that's excessive. That is overindulging because I've already eaten for the day. So that in itself, that's kind of how it shows itself for me quite often, is in an unplanned instance of eating. And it's still excessive eating. It's still overeating. The food is still great. It's still really tasty, but I'm eating when I'm not even hungry because I'm in a celebratory mood. For me, emotionally, if I'm very upset, then I'm not eating. But if I'm very excited and happy, then I might go eat something with friends. So likewise, that can flip and flop, for different people. When they're very happy, they may just find themselves doing other, physical activities or social things, and they may not find themselves overeating. That could very well be true for someone else who's very happy. And then when they're sad, potentially they go to a place where they're overeating or eating in secrecy, things like that. So there's this emotional side. And so you can peel that back again, and you can see that the root cause of that might actually be depression, right? The root cause of it might be something else going on. And so it's important, if you're trying to win the war against gluttony, it's really important that we're thinking about the fact that you may have to tackle more than one thing at the same time. You may be tackling gluttony, but trying to figure out what is at the root of your gluttony. And for someone who's got gluttony, but it began to rear itself right after childhood trauma, you're going to have to spiritually go after getting healed from childhood trauma if you're going to win against the gluttony. For other people who may have been in an abusive relationship, and abuse can mean men too. I want to go ahead and call that out, because there are many women who are now verbally abusing and sometimes physically abusing men as well. So if there's someone who's been in a situation of domestic violence, and that can be verbal abuse, it can be saying things out loud that are very hurtful to one another, and it can also be physical. If someone is suffering from domestic violence, and then after that they start eating secretly or overeating and indulging, then you're going to have to be tackling, if you want to win the battle against gluttony, you're going to have to battle, a lot of the trauma that came in through the domestic violence if you want to win the battle against gluttony. So I just want to make sure that we can see that sometimes, it's coming in. It may be coming in through fear. If you went through something really difficult as a child and you've got post-traumatic stress disorder, that kind of thing that you're battling, and some fears going in with that, what do? It may trigger you to go to a place of eating for comfort or finding comfort food. We even have the term comfort food. So again, it may be that you're dealing with gluttony, but it's also partnered with, post-traumatic stress or partnered with fear, and so those things are oftentimes interconnected. It's not just gluttony by itself. It's usually a package deal, and you may have to work through more than one aspect of your emotions, or more than one aspect spiritually, or be delivered from more than one thing in order to win the battle against gluttony. So I want to call that out. I want to go ahead and call it out. And again, I just want to mention that being really organized about your day the day before is going to be really, really helpful in battling gluttony. And I will tell you, like the night before I'm getting ready to go, work out, I'm thinking about what's my outfit going to be, because, I'll be thinking, oh, I want to look cute when I go to the gym. So I'll be thinking, what's my outfit going to be? What shoes am I going to wear with it? I'm thinking actively about what time am I going to go? If I want to get outdoors and exercise, I'm trying to figure out what time is the weather going to be warmest if it's the winter, or coolest if it's the summer. What time am I going to be able to avoid the rain? So there is some planning that goes into the aspect of taking care of our physical vessel. And it usually isn't last minute or day of. If you can get to a place where, even in this aspect of battling gluttony, where you're doing, again, meal prep, preparing your things in advance, a couple of days in advance, or on a Sunday or something like that, then you're going to have what's accessible to you is going to be healthy. And what you're going to easily grab at is going to be something that's actually more healthy for you. So that's just something to take with you. So, again, we've just finished talking about the fact that, gluttony comes in where there's kind of a partnership with other types of spiritual concerns, that it can be a trigger from something that happened a long time ago, or even more recently. It could be triggered by, being depressed, maybe losing a job, things like that, relationships that break. Also, it could be triggered by joy, happiness, celebration, all of those things. And whatever that is, at times we have to tackle both the gluttony and the other partner issue that's at the root. So let's get into a little bit about the Bible. And I want to make sure that we're talking about a little bit about the Bible, because I think that there's some of these stories that I got new revelation on, and I really hadn't read through that way the first time I read them. So I thought it blew my mind when I actually read some of these stories. I thought these stories were actually pretty interesting. So we take it all the way back to, let's take it back first to the time of Adam and Eve. Let's talk a little bit about Adam and Eve. And I want to talk about Adam and Eve simply because I think it's important for us to cover, the beginning of time and what kinds of things happened at the beginning of time. And we all kind of know the story of Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve, in the garden, God had given them instructions, let them know that they should not be eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That's the one tree that they should not eat from. And they disobeyed God. And when they disobeyed God, it started with Eve having, what did she have? It was a piece of food. She was being disobedient. The sin was actually disobedience, but when you look at it, and I never really, I don't think about these things all the time, but she went and she grabbed on some food. And so food was part of the picture when she was disobedient. It was part of the picture when she fell into sin. Of course, I want to make sure that we, context wise, this is a woman who was being disobedient. Context wise, that story is about a woman who's falling, away from the headship of her husband, not being submissive to her husband. She was listening to an ungodly source. All those things are actually the context, and God had given instructions. She was falling outside the structure that God had given. But when you look at what she actually did, she grabbed a piece of food. She grabbed a piece of food, and food was at the center of the sin. It was at the center of her disobedience. And look at when we actually think about the fact that gluttony is a sin, a lot of us, again, we minimize it, but the fall of humanity actually occurred with a piece of food at the center of it. When we actually think about it, that's how serious this is. So I wanted to call that out because we don't often think about it like a piece of food was at the center of the fall of humanity. It was disobedience, actually. It was disobedience. Let's be honest. Context, it's disobedience. But food was part of that disobedience. I want to throw that out there because that's a simple one to cover. And again, when we think about what happened, Adam shared in that food with Eve. They were removed from the Garden of Eden, and they were separated from the tree of life, which brought about death of man. It brought about our bodies slowly deteriorating because we were now separated from the tree of life, and now our bodies began to deteriorate because of food. And so when we talk about the fact that at the source, food can be something good for us, but be something bad for us, that's a real thing. When we talk about the fact that, food can be used to kill us, that is a real thing. Food in this case that was eaten was the position that a person went before they had the judgment of death. And we know in that story, there was many different aspects of judgment, right? Women began having labor pains. That was part of the judgment. Man had to begin, really toiling the land in order to, till the land, really sweat when they worked. All those things were also part of it. But let's be honest, food was part of it and death was part of it as judgment. So I wanted to call that out because I thought that was interesting. The next Bible story that I want to call out is let's talk a little bit about the story of Noah, because I don't think that we often think about Noah and actually go to the place and actually talk about food. We don't often do that. When we talk about Noah, we often talk about Noah getting ready for the great flood. Noah, who was close to God and walked with God, had a great relationship with God. Noah, who God spoke to him when God had said, there is nothing but evil across all humanity. I see evil continuously. But Noah, this one is different. I'm going to bless him. I want to make sure that he doesn't go down when I flood the entire earth, get rid of the men, the animals, the creepy crawly things, including the Nephilim. God had gotten rid of all the people were doing the craziest things at the time of Noah. These guys women were having relations with sons of man who were the fallen angels. Women were doing all kinds of things, things were horrible, and God had to issue a flood of the earth to clear it out, send judgment, but clear it out. But he saw something special about Noah. So he spoke to Noah and he said, Noah, I'm going to have you bring a couple of animals of all types, some clean, some unclean. I want you to bring your family, and I want you to build this ark. And he had to be obedient to God and build the ark. He built the ark. He didn't even need the ark for 100 years. 100 years passed before the great flood actually happened, but he built the ark. And so we often think about the story of Noah, and we think about the great flood, and we think about the ark. But let's peel back that story just a little bit, because there's more to that story than meets the eye. So when we talk about that story, we talk about the fact that, I want to first call out, when we look back at Genesis, man was given dominion over the animals. I want to make sure you guys have a recall of that. Man were given dominion over the animals and over every creeping and crawling thing. I want you guys to keep that in mind. That is from the book of Genesis. So again, at no point should an animal have dominion over us. That's one thing I want to call to your attention. The next thing I want to call to your attention is the fact that, when it came to Noah went out, and God had told Noah, I need you to take some of the animals, some clean, some unclean, bring them with you. But he said, I also want you to store up food. That's something that he also said. He wanted him to store up food because God understood timing for Noah was going to be as such that he was going to need food available over the span of time that he was waiting. And so if Noah did not have self-control, it brings you back to a space, and the Bible doesn't talk about this, but again, if Noah didn't have self-control, even if he was obedient to God's instruction of take X, Y, and Z amount of food, store it up, if he were to blow through the food and overindulge or eat it excessively, the food wouldn't have lasted the amount of time that it needed to last. And so that is a real thing. So again, God had a need to remove wickedness at that time. Therefore, he brought about a great flood to blot out man from the face of the earth. That's Genesis chapter 6, verse 5 through 8. And so the instructions that God gave Noah were to make an ark, go out with his family, collect the animals, and go into the ark. At some point, he told him to go into the ark. But he said, take with you every sort of food that is eaten and store it up. It shall be service food for you and for them. That is what God said. Genesis chapter 6, verse 21. So again, the relationship that Noah had to have with food was dominion over food. He had to have self-control. And that's not the moral of that story. The moral of the story is that God will take his special people and actually secure them amongst worldwide floods and events, and he will select people based on who he's walking with and who he loves. I mean, that's not the full context of the story, but I find it very interesting that Noah had to have control over something like gluttony in order to succeed in that particular battle. Think about it. Chapter 7, I want to say verse 17, the flood continued for 40 days on the earth. Chapter 7, verse 24, the water is prevailed on the earth 150 days. So there was actually a difference between the water prevailing and the earth actually drying up. So there needed to be extra time for all that stuff to dry up. And it really just goes to show you, how important it was really for Noah to be ready for anything and to be a man of self-control. So again, 150 days plus, he needed to survive. 150 days plus, the instructions of God, this food that he stored up, the food had to last that long. I mean, for us, it's like half a year, right? So God had left him with those instructions. And if he were disobedient, it would have probably caused him his life. Much like with Adam and Eve, they were disobedient. Food was in the center of it at some points, right? And it cost them their life. This also could have cost Noah his life if he wasn't obedient around even bringing the food, around storing it up, if he didn't have self-discipline over those things. And so when you think about it, what happened at the very end? Once Noah was able to successfully exit the ark and exit it with his family, right? The first thing that he did is he presented an altar, food that was pleasing to the Lord. Again, food at the center. And now we're seeing food that's being pleasing to the Lord, being presented to God. And so we're seeing this. I never even read the story like that in the past. Interestingly enough, I never read this story and ever thought about food. Never once occurred to me. But this time I was like, this is about food as well. And so you see, he offered the food to God, and God was so pleased with the offering. What happened right after that? The offering was described as pleasing to the Lord, and he said he would never curse the ground again because of man. That's chapter 9, verse 11 through 17. So I just want to call that out as a wild one that I never read. I feel like I've never read that, y'all. I read that this week, and I feel like I never read it that way. He went from understanding and having dominion over food, having self-control. Then the food went to a place of being positioned as being an offering for God. And the offering was so pleasing. Right after that, God said, I'm never going to flood the earth again. That was so pleasing. Now, whether God did it because of that reason, I don't know. But I thought it was beautiful. Let's talk a little bit about the story of Abraham, because you guys are not going to believe how many biblical stories have food at the center of it. So at the time of Abraham, you guys know, Abraham had prayed, and he wanted that, he never could have a son, right? He struggled with having a son. He had Sarah, his wife. She was barren. They were old. They were both elderly people. He finally got Isaac, one of his sons, right? He got Isaac. And after he had Isaac, one of the reasons that God considered Abraham so faithful is because when God said, I want you to bring your son up as a sacrifice, I want you to sacrifice him, he was faithful and he was willing to do it. He literally took his son, picked him up, put him on the altar, drew the sword back. He was ready to do what he had to do when he thought that God wanted him to sacrifice his own son. Abraham was willing and ready to do that. And we all know the story. the angel of the Lord came and stopped Abraham from doing such a thing because he understood that Abraham had the faith. He understood that Abraham was very obedient to the Most High God. And so, God and Abraham also understood that God would send a sacrifice for Isaac. Look at what happened when he was walking along with Isaac. Isaac's like, "What's going on, Dad?" And he's like, where's the sacrifice? Where's the sacrifice? And Abraham turned around and said to his son, "God will send a sacrifice for himself. Don't worry." And he actually did. So when Abraham got ready to draw the sword and sacrifice Isaac, the angel of the Lord stopped him. And after Isaac turned around and looked, there was a ram behind him that he could use as an acceptable sacrifice to the Lord. So we could unstrap Isaac, we can put that sword down, and now we can use the ram. The ram becomes a sacrifice. Again, the ram, an animal, but also considered food. Again, food at a place that is an acceptable sacrifice for God. So this was an acceptable sacrifice for God. Again, this is all inside of chapter 22, verse 14. You'll see this. So I found that to be very interesting. This ram was a provision of God. It was a provision. That ram was not there when he went to go sacrifice his son Isaac. The ram was only there after the angel of the Lord said, "Stop, don't do it." He turned around and the ram was suddenly there. Again, that was a provision from God, that animal. That sacrifice was not to be taken lightly. And so think about if we would have taken that ram and instead of offered it as a sacrifice for God, what if we would have excessively ate the ram? What if we would have indulged in the ram? See, that's what I'm talking about. When we talk about sin being a gluttony and then gluttony being a sin and then food being at the center of it, that's what I'm talking about. So again, it just reminds us that the provisions of God, food, the provisions of God, food, the same thing that Noah needed to store up, it was a provision of God. Abraham needed that ram as a sacrifice and a suitable sacrifice for God, and God gave him that suitable sacrifice. Let's talk again, because I don't want to stop there. I want to talk about, since we're talking about Abraham, let's go ahead and let's talk another story about Abraham really quick. Again, this is after Isaac had grown up. Now, Isaac had made it through the hard part, right? Almost becoming a sacrifice, but he made it through that. Later on, Abraham wanted to make sure that his son Isaac had a proper wife. And so we already know, we talked last week when we talked about model chicks. If you guys were on the last stream, we talked about model chicks, and we know that God did not want his holy people being in unequally yoked relationships. He specifically said, the land that you're going to, the promised land where the Canaanites were, we don't want you to intermarry, because you're going to have people there that do not worship the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of the Holy Bible. You will find that there are people that are there that worship false gods. And so we don't want you to intermarry. We don't want you to be unequally yoked. And so Abraham understood that he could not find an acceptable bride, for his son in a land where there was a lot of pagan rituals going. He wanted to go back to his family area and get a suitable wife for his son. So in that story, the story is actually about, given the context here, the story is about getting a suitable partner for his son. I want to keep it in context. However, when I read the story again, it wasn't originally about gluttony, right? It's really about him getting a suitable partner for his son. But when I read into that story and peel it back, y'all, blew my mind. Abraham sends his servant to go look for a suitable partner for his son Isaac. He sends him out, and his servant, who was very obedient to Abraham, his servant goes out, and he's thinking, I'm going to go sit down. I'm going to wait for a beautiful woman to, fetch me some water, and make sure that this woman fetches some water for my camels. The woman who is willing to give me a drink and also offers a drink to the animals is going to be the right woman for Isaac. So that's what I'm going to be waiting on. So he went out and he waited. And one of the first women that he came across was a woman who did such a thing. And I thought that was very interesting. Again, this is showing the heart of the woman. Obviously the woman was still a pure woman. She was a virgin, all those kinds of good things. But when we think about it, Rebecca, who he encountered, This is a woman who had to have a loving heart, a giving heart. She couldn't be someone who was trying to have all of the water for herself. She had to be someone who was willing to share and had a heart of give, a heart to give as an instinct. It had to be an instinct that, what can I do for you instinct. And so, and Rebecca, was one who did those things. And after he noticed Rebecca, and noticed what she did, that she was willing to give water for him and give some water for the camels, he invited her. He explained who he was. He invited her. He said, hey, is there space at your house for me and my animals? Is there space? Could I come and stay at your house, with your family for a night? She agreed, and she brought him all the way to her house with her family. And when he sits down, the family tends to his animals. Beautiful thing. The family tends to the animals. He's getting ready to spend the night. The family lays out a spread of food. And you have to think about it. You guys think about it. Abraham's servant did not have a poverty mindset. He did not have a mindset that was gluttonous. When he sat down at that spread full of food, he could have been going at the food right away. He could have done that, but he didn't. He absolutely didn't. He waited. He wanted to have the serious conversations. He wanted to ensure that he got the wife for Isaac before he even indulged in the food. The food wasn't on the top of his mind. Getting the wife for Isaac was at the top of his mind. Look at what he did. Chapter 24, verse 33. Even the servant had self-control over what he would eat. Then food was set before him to eat. But he said, I will not eat until I have said what I have to say. The marriage offer went out. On verse 49, chapter 24. The father and brother allowed Rebekah to go and be the wife of Isaac as the Lord had spoken. So you can see, and Abraham offered him praise. Guys, this is a big deal. The big deal is this is not a man. This is a man who was a servant. So when there's all this food spread out, he could have easily been tempted and been distracted by that food and just been eating the food and forgot all about the promises that he made to his master, Abraham. But that was not his focus. He had full control. He had full dominion over his body. He had full self-control, and he was able to focus on the mission. The mission was to bring home a wife for Isaac, and he would not touch food until he secured the deal. So that just goes to show you, that was how it happened. Of course, he got permission from the family. Rebecca equally agreed to go back with the servant, and eventually Rebecca, went on back to the place of Abraham's. So I thought that was an interesting story to take a look at. Again, there's one other story I think I might want to cover in this aspect, but you guys get the point. Some of these stories don't look like stories about food and about self-control, but they absolutely are about food, and they absolutely are about self-control. Let's cover one other biblical story that I don't think we often think about when we think about gluttony and self-control. But let's talk about the story of Cain and Abel. And for those of you guys who know, the story of Cain and Abel was a battle, battle of the brotherhood, right? It was a battle of the brotherhood, and a battle of anger and slaughter and all that kind of good stuff. That's what was up, actually. But part of what we were seeing is this all kind of started, when Cain and Abel were both making an offering to God, and Abel made an acceptable offering to God. He took a sacrifice, which again was an animal. It was the firstborn of his flock with the fat portions. That is chapter 4, verse 3. That is what we're talking about. Abel gave an acceptable sacrifice to God. Turns out Cain went and grabbed some fruit, and that was going to be the sacrifice, some fruit from the ground. So God was just more pleased with the offering that came from Abel. He was more pleased, and he let Cain know that. He let him know that, this is nice. What Abel did was more acceptable. And so Cain went from doing a sacrifice, offering a sacrifice that was less than acceptable. He went from that to, after seeing God's disappointment, he didn't have control of his emotions. Imagine that. Now we're seeing the parallel here. Where we have this sin called gluttony, right? There is that sin out there, but you see there's a self-control issue right here. So there's a self-control issue. He gets angry with God. He turns around, he becomes violent, and he kills his brother. And in the center of this, food is at the center of this fight. Food's at the center of it. So you can see, but this is also an issue around self-control. So you can see that. So we can look at that and we can see that where there's food, you can also see there's self-control. There could be a self-control issue, where there is anger. That's also a disorder of the flesh. So food, anger, sexual immorality, addictions, all of these things, alcoholism, drunkenness, these things are actually in the same bucket. They're actually in the same bucket, and God doesn't find them pleasing. So it's interesting that we see that there. So of course, we all know how that goes. Cain kills Abel, there's the slaughter and all that kind of good stuff. But, I wanted to bring out the fact that you see food is in the middle of this battle. Food's at the middle of it. So again, Galatians talks about us avoiding works of the flesh, things like anger, etc. So want to make sure that we know that. Also wanted to make sure that we understand that, self-control can actually be a battle. We may have to contend for self-control in our lives. We may have to give that to God. We may have to partner with the Lord Jesus Christ and give ourselves over and ask him to strengthen us in the order of self-control, be it a place where there's anger, be it a place where there's addiction, be it a place where there's gluttony, where there's lust, all of those things. Those are in the same bucket, and I don't want us to minimize one over the other, because sin is sin in the eyes of God. It is a separation from God, and in order to reconcile ourselves back to him, if we know that we're over here eating in secret, if we know, even if we don't have a visible look of being overweight, if we're eating in secret, if we're hiding it and eating it in secret, if we're overindulging, if that is our struggle, then it's important for us to understand it's a sin like any other sin, and all we have to do is repent. It's as simple as that. Repent, meaning try to turn away from it, ask the Lord Jesus Christ to strengthen us and help us to fight that battle, and understand that it's also often very spiritual. Understand that although it seems like it's something in the natural that we're just eating, look at how many times in the Bible that our Heavenly Father had food presented to him as either an acceptable sacrifice or as a way to honor him. So we're giving that food over to God on an altar as a way to celebrate him, honor him, or it's used as a provision for us to help sustain our lives. And in some cases, when we do what we are not supposed to do with regard to food, aka Adam and Eve with the apple, it can cause our death. And that is the aspect of gluttony being partially, a physical health issue and a spiritual health issue, that it can kill us in our physical body. And so I wanted to call that out just for a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about the scriptures that we have before we wrap up. Let's talk a little bit about the scriptures that speak to some of this. I want to make sure that we talk a little bit about the fact that 1 Corinthians 6:19-20 talks about our bodies being a temple of the Most High God. Don't forget, Jesus Christ lives inside of us. The Holy Spirit lives inside of us. When we are saved individuals, our bodies are not our own. So 1 Corinthians 6:19-20 talks about it. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You are bought with a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. Romans 13, rather clothe yourselves with the Lord Jesus Christ, and do not think about how to gratify the desires of the flesh. 1 Corinthians 15:44, it is sown a natural body, it is raised a spiritual body. If there is a natural body, there is also a spiritual body. Guys, this is the important reason when we talk about gluttony, it impacts both our physical health body and our spiritual body. It affects both places. That's why you guys see me talking about total body health all the time, because I understand there is a physical health aspect to things, and there is also a spiritual health aspect. And you can sometimes have, obesity, or you cannot have obesity and still have a spiritual health issue, which is gluttony. That is a spiritual issue. Although Galatians, let's talk about works of the flesh. Galatians 5:19-21. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanliness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murderers, drunkenness, revellings, and such like, of which I tell you before, as I have also told you in the time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. So when we talk about the fact that these are bucketed with works of the flesh, lack of self-control, things like that, they're bucketed with works of the flesh, it's important that we battle this all the way through and not take gluttony, because the devil is going to want to tell you that gluttony is not a big deal. But if you're giving yourself over and not having dominion over these works of the flesh, they are actually a sin. It is not pleasing to God, but God is looking for a simple thing, repentance, turning away from it, asking him to strengthen you to fight past that. And in some cases, you're going to be successful when you look at the root and try to tackle what other thing is causing you to be triggered to behave in a gluttonous way. And so it's demonic stuff that's often at the root that's causing us. It may be our childhood trauma, where we felt a certain kind of way during childhood trauma that's got us to a place where we seek the comfort of food. That's just the truth. Proverbs 25:28, it talks about self-control. A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. 1 Corinthians 10:13, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. And don't forget, 2 Timothy 1-7, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but a spirit of power, of love, and of self-control. So when we think about any instance where we don't have self-control, that is a sin. That's no longer walking in the spirit. That puts us exactly square where we're walking in the flesh again, which is in opposition to the will of God. Let's talk a little bit about Galatians 5:22-23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. So you guys see how this is shaken up, right? You see this. And also we have to be careful. We have to be really careful about doing the things in secret. Luke 8:17, for nothing is hidden that will not be manifest, nor is anything secret that will not be known and come to light. So there is no such thing as doing things in secret. God is always able to see what we're doing. So there is no doing it in secret. God is watching. He's aware of what things are sin. He understands our heart posture. He understands that. And we have to be very careful. When we look at other people, we have to be very careful, because what looks like is one thing doesn't have to be that thing. Doesn't have to be that thing. So we have to be careful, not to, go to a place of, judgment with other people, right? John 7:24, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. Ecclesiastes 12:14, for God will bring every deed into judgment, every secret thing, whether good or evil. So it's very important, guys. It's very important for us to really remember that in this battle of gluttony, it's really important for us to remember that it is actually a sin, and we can, allow people to put things in our mind and minimize it. But I don't want us to minimize gluttony. The impact of gluttonous behavior over time, it causes physical health problems. It causes many different types of physical health problems. And those things, we want to make sure if we can minimize that, we want to minimize it. But on top of it, it's just really important when we think about the battle of gluttony, that it's often very spiritual. If we look all the way back to when our gluttony actually began, if we look back, the separation point between not behaving that way and behaving that way was likely a traumatic event. And then we started behaving that way. So that will tell you if there's also a spiritual root that goes along with the gluttony. And you may have two battles, not just one, in order to secure safety from the battle of gluttony. And so with that, that's all I have for today, guys. Thank you guys for joining. Join us again next time when we go live Thursday, 7 p.m. Central Time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, when we go live with the Victory Life Podcast. Guys, next week, we're going to be talking about Being Thirsty, and I can't wait for it. It's going to talk a little bit about us being in a place where we're talking about being attention seeking, but it's going to be interesting. I'm going to have some turns and some loops and some detours that you're not really going to expect, so I can't wait for it. Again, join us next time, Thursday, 7 p.m. Central Time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram with the Victory Life Podcast. Until next time, guys. Bye, everybody. Bye, YouTube. Bye, Facebook. Bye, Instagram. Thank you guys for joining. Thursday, 7 p.m. Central Time with the Victory Life Podcast. Thank you, guys. Thank you, guys. I see you guys on Instagram coming in here strong tonight, guys. Thank you guys for joining. Join us next time, Thursday, 7 p.m. Central Time, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Next time we're going to be talking about being thirsty, guys. Being thirsty. I can't wait for it. We're tackling all that attention-seeking behavior. We're going to tackle that. And guys, I have a few little surprises along the way. I can't wait for it. Thank you, guys. See you guys next time. Bye. Don't forget, Thursday, 7 p.m. Central Time with the Victory Life Podcast. Till next time, guys. Thank you, guys. Bye, Instagram. Bye, Facebook. Next time. Bye. Bye, everybody. Ooh, Facebook came in strong tonight, guys. Bye, everybody.